It's one small step for man.
Out for the out for the out for the
Here's what's going on podcast with me, AJ, and we'll jump right in to the ABCs, AJ's Book Corner, and we're reading The Missing Half by Ashley Flowers and Alex Keister. We make awkward small talk on the drive and walk into my apartment 15 minutes later. I try to refuse to be embarrassed by it, but it doesn't work. My rent is necessarily cheap in my place, depressing one of those prefabricated apartments with a soulless interior, low ceilings, beige paint, wooden cabinets made in the 90s that swing unevenly on loose hinges, and right now it's a disaster. Dishes fill the sink, smears of food hardened on their surfaces. In one of the corners of the living room, the leaves of an old houseplant have withered on the stalk. Next to it is a litter box that hasn't been used for over 6 months now. Last year, during a fit of optimism, I adopted an underfed tuxedo cat, bought a handful of toys from Goodwill, and told myself I was turning my life around. I named him Slink, and soon I'd fallen deeply in love. But a month in, I realized he deserved someone better, someone who'd feed him properly, not just leftovers, someone who could afford to take him to the vet, someone who didn't use wine to fall asleep. I took him back to the shelter and tried to forget he was ever mine. The litter box catches my eye and I see with embarrassment the proof of my inability to see things through. So I say to Jenna, "What'd you do now? What do you want to know?" She glances around. We're standing across from each other in the middle of the small living room. I was sort of thinking we could have a conversation, sit down, maybe have a glass of water. I'm not an inherently inhospitable person, but I want to know what her sister wrote in that diary. Still, we made a deal. Fine, I say. You sit, I'll get the waters. I fill 2 glasses from the tap in the kitchen and bring one to Jenna, who's now sitting on the couch. I take the other with me to the small table where I eat my meals and make a show of taking a sip. What do you want to know? I thought you could just start by telling me what Casey was like. I mean, I know what was on the news, but it's not the same. My stomach lurches. A knee-jerk horse's hoof in the gut. Her question sounds like a softball. I know, but it isn't. When someone dies, most people's reaction is to slap some reductive feel-good label on their legacy, or smile could light up a room. He was the life of the party. The claims are so blanketed they leave no room for a nuance or for reality. Even I, who spent years learning better, still do it. Hadn't I, just a few minutes earlier, searched for some superlative to stick in front of Jules' name? As if prettiest, smartest, or funniest was the only thing that could give her life meaning? Hypocrite, I think acidly. Yeah, so you can see how easy, it reads very well. When I read a book, there's a lot of things I take into consideration that I don't even think about, but then when I describe the book to people, I'm kind of here's what I thought of the book. And I rarely give a terrible review except for 2 books, but I won't ever tell those. But just to let my family and friends, when I talk about what I'm reading, I always try to give a realistic view of it. But so far, I like this story. I think it's written well. You can hear the characters' voices very easily, and that's something I like, because you can have stories and books where the characters all sound the same. They even talk in the same cadence and things like that, and that makes the book really dull. When the writer is able to write the characters to where you can hear their independent voices, it's just a joy to be able to do. But let's jump right into today's episode. We're discussing the article, How Nature Helps Us Return to Ourselves. Even brief time outside can restore perspective, attention, and calm, by Brendan Kelly, MD, PhD. Life has a way of narrowing our attention, right? We're looking at screens all day. We're working 8 to 10, 12 hours. We're dedicating at least 8 hours a day, probably, and depending on your commute, maybe more a day, to worry, stress, and just constantly trying to improve, meet performance standards, all this stuff, right? And it can be really intense and whatnot. So when our attention narrows like that, we lose our sense of proportion. So a single, a really difficult email can mess up your whole morning. A small disappointment can feel like a final verdict. Just things that affect us like that. But nature kind of does something where it widens our perspective. Article talks about a simple path, walking through a simple path with the trees, amongst nothing. It doesn't demand anything from you. It doesn't ask you for anything. It simply just offers nature. It just offers itself. A tree are birds and deer and turtles and like all the stuff that I see. They're never in a rush. They're naturally in their habitat. They're naturally free. They're going about their lives. And although nature doesn't take away the very human problems that we have, it kind of puts it in perspective for you when you're surrounded in nature. And I speak from experience, of course, because I hike often. So, like, when we do like a retreat or something like to the mountains or remote wilderness, you feel this like level of relief, and that's necessary because recent research shows some of that is far more accessible to more people than what they think. So studies on nature exposure show that spending as little as 10 minutes outside, even in like an urban type of park, or just anywhere with green area in the middle of a city, can improve your mental health. And then shorter reported moments outside throughout the week appear to be especially helpful. So, not to try to like romanticize like nature or anything, but go ahead and just get under a tree, you know what I'm saying? Now, nature isn't like a magical cure, isn't a substitute professional like mental health or any of that stuff. But, it can be helpful when you add it in to your recovery, and I speak from experience. It worked because it changes the type of attention we use. We have to give our direct attention most of the time in our daily lives to like concentrate, respond, communicate, and it's necessary. But it's very exhausting to have to do that as much as we are demanded to have to do it. And nature kind of invites what psychologists call a softer attention. Leaves flicker in the wind, water trickles, birds appear and disappear. Your mind has something gentle to rest on without needing to control or dominate or feel like it's demanding of us. So here's a little bit more of, how you can kind of bring this to your life. Just step outside for 10 minutes. Leave your headphones behind for just a few moments. Notice, like, the trees. Notice the colors are changing, because that's one of my favorite things during the fall, summer. Like, the trees lose their leaves, and I'm just like, oh, man. And then it's like, they're coming back. And then it snows, it gets cold, and the trees are naked, and then, stuff like that. Just be there. Be in the moment there. I don't always I take pictures, but recently I've been kind of just enjoying my hike and not taking as many pictures and whatnot, and just taking breaths and enjoying, being out in nature and looking at things. Like, it was raining really badly today when I was hiking. And I was one of the only people, one of the two people out there, because there was the other guy, but I think he walks from wherever he lives to the park. But yeah, I was out there, and I had my poncho on, and I was just out there in nature listening to the rain. It was really nice. And getting to see the pond with the rain hitting it, and it kind of, the raising of the water, and you got the birds out there, and they're flying around for cover and stuff like that. It was just nice, and like I appreciate that because it doesn't demand anything of me. It's just like, hey, you're here with us, look at this, watch it, see it. And like you can see like where the trail has been like made by people walking, and the water was running down it, and it goes into the pond. It's crazy to watch how far that water travels from those trails, and how it runs straight into the ponds that are at that park. It's insane. It was like I got hypnotized watching. I was like, oh my gosh, it's crazy how the water runs down there, and then it ends up filtering into the pond or into the like the small little trail, like waterways that are there. I was mesmerized by it. But it took me out of my head, like it put me in the present, in my moment, and stuff like that. So yeah, you don't need to like have your music on all the time. You don't need to take photos all the time. Just be there. I think nature reminds us how to put things in perspective, that you have these big, huge, tall trees swaying in the flipping wind and rain, and it's just going to help facilitate growth of the trees and health of the soil and stuff like that. So free your mind from that. Moving on to what I'm happy and grateful for. I'm happy and grateful for my poblano pepper plant's growth. It's like 2.5 feet tall. It doesn't have any flowers yet, but it's getting there. The quote, because I have known despair, I value hope. Because I have tasted frustration, I value fulfillment. Because I have been lonely, I value love. That's by Leonard Nimoy. Yeah, I think it says everything. You can't have one. You can't, I don't know. To me, I feel like you can't value the other without having endured the other side of it. Like the darkness of whatever it is. Like joy without sadness, you know, wealth without being poor. You know, there's the two sides of the coin. You got to experience both sides to fully appreciate each one. And I'm not even saying like the good side's the only side or the positive side's the only side we should appreciate, because you have to understand, to appreciate the hope, you have to have had despair. To appreciate the frustration, or to appreciate the fulfillment, you have to understand and appreciate the frustration. To, you know, appreciate love, you have to also appreciate the loneliness. So I think that's how I view this quote. But before I go, be sure to check out the show notes. Also, check out my books on Amazon titled Poems to Cry to in the Dark and Love Letters Never Sent to Myself, and leave a 5-star rating. Other than that, I don't have anything else. I'm glad you're still here, and I hope you have the day you deserve. Bye!
One giant leap